Okay, in this video, I'm going to run through my smart home automation PLC programming using a system called Loxon. And yeah, I want to give you a quick overview of what that software looks like, how I'm doing some programming. It might give you some inspiration on how you can do it in your home. Let's get into it. My smart home automation PLC programming. So let me give you a overview to start with. So this system that I'm using is called Loxon. As you can see, they're a PLC based smart home automation manufacturer that you can also use them for doing BEMS and other custom applications. So here you kind of got, let's move me out of the way. You've got your sort of notebook programming pages here, and we'll get into that in a second. And you've also got your periphery column here, where you can add rooms, different categories of, like what your programming is doing and what blocks are doing what, which I'll get into, and then you can categorize them to whether they're related to climate control or electricity or energy, and then you can categorize them within the app. So when you look in the app, you can go to the category that's associated with that thing. And then pretty self-explanatory for you here, similar sort of stuff. And then you can see here is I'm using 3 different mini servers, which are these, the main controllers, all networked together in my home. So we've got like the gateway main mini server, and then I've got, which was a wired mini server, and that was actually up in the loft that had a direct network cable to it. This client mini server was then, this is a mini server Go, which is a wireless mini server. So that was then downstairs, and that had, you'll see all the wireless devices going to it, because my home was a retrofit, so it was easy to wire some of the upstairs stuff because I could just get to light fittings, mostly lighting. Lighting upstairs was wired because I could get in the loft, but then everything downstairs on the ground floor was pretty much wireless. So then I had this mini server Go downstairs as the wireless hub that connected to all the wireless lighting, wireless switches, wireless valve actuators, etc. And then I had, that also had a network connection. And then this workshop mini server was, same as the gateway mini server, a wired one in my office workshop, and that also had a network cable. So all of these can work together because they're all on the network. And also what that means is with Loxon, you can kind of build out, as you're doing the programming, you're also building out the user interface. So you're not having to do the programming. So this is what happens with a lot of other softwares and systems, is you do all the programming, like things like this, and then you need to basically, that's one thing. And then the second thing you need to do is you need to visualize the programming. So you then need to create interactive visualization that people can see and interact with, like people using the home on an app interface. Whereas with Loxon, you don't necessarily have to do that. It's all done through these blocks automatically. So that being said, even though these are different controllers, they're all together on the network and being visualized in one place on the app. So that's the periphery tree. And then what happens is over here, you got this, or not tree, column, you've got the properties column. So if we go into something here, like operating modes, and then we go on the all out operating mode, we can see the properties of that appear over here. So digital inputs. So then we can adjust the properties of that thing within the peripheries. This here user interface, that's what I was just talking about. If we want to quickly visualize that in the app, then we can click use in user interface, and then we can categorize it, we can prioritize it as to where that would appear in the app. We can put statistics, so it can like log every time that input gets triggered. It can create a log, and then we can do stuff off the back of that. We can send email updates, etc. Permissions, etc., etc. I won't bore you with all of that, but so that's kind of how this is laid out. And then what we've also got is we've got these tabs up the top here. So like my project, and there's a few things happening up here. I won't get into all of that. Testing, so this is really helpful. We can actually run tests and simulate our programming to make sure that it's working correctly before it is a live running system. So we can do that. We can run diagnostics. We can, add things to the network. We can add things wirelessly using that air technology that I mentioned, that the mini server goes using. And then we can also use their proprietary tree infrastructure to also add devices and do diagnostics and whatnot. And then we've also got like additional controls and programming and features specifically for mini servers up here, as you can see. So now this is not going to be a complete comprehensive guide, but let's now dive into like the main gateway mini server. So what we've got is we've got two things here, CPU throttling and temperature shutdown. So if, for example, let's look at the temperature shutdown. If the CPU temperature reaches a critical point, the outputs of the device are switched off. This can be due to short circuits, overloaded, blah, 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 high ambient temperature. Now, I used to get this occasionally in the middle of summer, where this was up in the loft and there was no ventilation. I would sometimes have this over temperature, where the ambient temperature was too high, and things would shut off. So I would, what did I do here? Yeah, I kind of kept note of this. So if that triggered, so this is what we're looking at over here. If that mini server up in the loft got to a point where the ambient temperature was too high, this here, as you can see, it's been dragged out onto the page, would trigger. So let me show you that. It would ultimately trigger like that. It's got too hot, trigger. That then, as you can see with this programming, I've connected it. So that's how they start off on the page. Whoops. Like that. And then you can just drag them to connect to things. So that's what I've done here. And I've, on the output side, or the thing that is connected to, I've got it connected to a notification, a push notification that you can see up here. So notification. So basically, when that triggered, when that got that hot, it would send me a push notification to my phone to say, what did it say? Did I name it? Yeah, basically, Gateway Mini Server Loft overheating. So I would get that notification. And let's move on. So I wasn't using any digital inputs for anything here. Let's say that I was. Let's say someone pushed a switch. That would then or let's say someone like pressed a switch and held it on, it was like locked on, that would then trigger that input. And then we can do other things off the back of that, like connect it to maybe a bathroom fan, for example, or a light. Maybe we connect it to a relay. So this is a digital output on the relay. Sorry, a digital output as in a relay on the mini server. So we got digital inputs in the top here, and then we got relays out the bottom. So we might push that switch, and then we want a light that's connected to the mini server to come on. So we could do this. So that's a light connected to a light. We want that connected. So when someone pushes that switch, what we can do here is a little tip, because we might just want it to be a retractive switch acting like this. So only when we hold it, or maybe we don't, it depends on the application. But you can see here, it's locked on, it switches that light on, we switch it off, it switches off. Or what we could do is highlight that input down here on the properties, simulation live view, display type at the moment is a switch. So let's change that to push normally open, and it changes here. So then we can go like that. It only switches on the light when we're holding the mouse, button, or when we're pressing that switch. And we can do it on the normally closed as well. So normally closed. So it's locked on, we're not touching anything, we're not touching the switch, it's locked on until we press the switch and we've got it held, and it acts the opposite way around. So it would depend on the application on how you set that up. So yeah, that's kind of digital inputs. And then outputs, as I mentioned, we've covered that for light. And then we can also create, rather than having like physical inputs, we skipped over digital inputs there. We can come back to that. Rather than having like physical inputs and outputs, we can kind of create virtual inputs in the memory of this PLC. So like, and they act pretty much in the same way. Beg your pardon, the outputs work in the same way. Sorry, the inputs work in the same way. The outputs are slightly different, and they're more based, as you can see up here, based on web commands. So you can see here, HTTP/S commands, or UDP commands, or commands sent over a network. So yeah, let's say that might send, if the API is open, we've got an open API, or Loxon's open API. Let's say that the thing that we're sending a command to on our home network, let's say like a Sonos system, we could this is a very simple example, but let's say that we have a retractive switch where we just press to trigger a play and pause. We might be Well, it'll be more like this. So we're pressing play or pause, and that might send a trigger command over the network. And this could be like the address. We put all the settings, the correct settings for the Sonos player in here, and then that would send a command over the network to pause or play songs on Sonos. So that's kind of how we do integrations with other third-party devices, you know, over the internet, over the network, with using HTTP commands. Where we can integrate other third-party devices, providing they have an open API. And actually, let's just jump to the link and the tree devices. And actually, what might be better if I show you this on... Let's stick with... Yachts. And what you've got is you've got like then on this mini server, you've got ways to connect. So this to other devices. So the link here, this blue and white one, that connects to other Loxon products. So in this case, we've got an Airbase extension. So that would be like another module next to this, where we connect it from the mini server to the next one using this Loxon link. And then we've also got this, as you can see here, green and white, which is our Loxon tree bus, and that then would connect to, so this is kind of in the panel, and then this would connect out to devices in the field if you're using Loxon's tree technology. So, you know, like spots, Loxon spots, Loxon motion sensors, Loxon switches, etc., etc. As you can see here, so Loxon pendulums, Loxon spots, and then Loxon motion sensor. That's what we're using that tree connection on this mini server to do upstairs, because I had two pendulum slims either side of the bed. I had two spots, as you can see, in the bathroom, and then had a motion sensor connected via tree in the bathroom as well. And then we did have one ceiling light connected to this airbase up in the loft as well. So it was hardwired from the 230 volts, but then the communication of changing the color and the light level of that light was controlled via this airbase connected to the link. And let's have a look at this. So there's also, like the airbase, we also have on the mini server Go. This was the wireless one downstairs in my lounge where the majority of the house was connected to. You can see here, also had a link connection, but more importantly, we were using it for the air base, wireless base. And this is where we had lots of devices connected. So you can see window and door contacts, more of those ceiling lights, motion sensors, nano dimmers. So this was to dim just standard 230 volt lights. This nano IO, so input, output, wireless input and output relay digital input thing, was for the heating. And then we got various other things, switches, for example, valve actuators, water sensor if there's a leak, night lights, all sorts of different things. You can see that they're connected wirelessly. These are all mostly, actually not all, battery operated, other than these lighting devices. And the smart sockets take their power from the socket. So yeah, it's kind of overview of the periphery and kind of overview of my setup. Let's just go into one page so you can see, and this is where the programming starts. So we've got a cover page, we've got autopilots, can't remember what I was meant to be doing on that page. We got notes, so just important here to just any type of programming, whether it's in a PLC, whether it's like structured text, you know, whether it's you're building code for an application, it's good to keep notes. Same way it is in doing this kind of programming in a PLC. This was kind of my test page just for messing about with things. Don't think that was active, but then you can see, and these colors correspond to the mini server. So you can see everything in the bathroom was connected to the mini server upstairs in the loft. So let me just walk you through this ventilation. So we got, let me test it for you. So yeah, so this fan control was basically if the humidity within the shower or in the bathroom got above 80%, as you can see here, and this was the humidity sensor. So I've highlighted that. You can see humidity feeding into this threshold block. If the humidity went over 80, ultimately, there's a few little things within here to make it work correctly. That would then trigger this switch that would then trigger this fan connected to a relay over here. And that would then run and extract the humidity or reduce the humidity until that humidity got down to 77. So it would switch off then. What we didn't want happening though is that fan to ever be running like at night. So if we set the house into night mode where everything's off, we don't want that running at night. It might wake up guests, it might wake up the baby. Like it's just not necessary. We're not showering, but the humidity might increase. So what we would do is, as you can see here, when the house was in night mode, it just held this switch off constantly, which would force it not to ever come on. And then in the morning, once we came out of night mode, then that would not be on, and then things would be back to normal. So that's a little bit of like custom programming for the bathroom. Let's go a little bit further. So yeah, and then you can see everything that's yellow is tied to, as you can see, the bulk of the house was like tied to the wireless mini server. And then I added a workshop towards the end where, you know, there's some lighting, there was some audio, and some other little bits, IR heater control. I'm going to leave it there for this video, but hopefully that gives you a little bit of an understanding of how you can use a PLC and the programming around that to program your home to being smart. See you later.